The Eevee-Extremist.
Yes, though if you read his own manifestos, he refers to himself quite unironically as the savior.
Savior. I mean, the sheer volume of documentation we have on this single-player save file is staggering.
It really is. We have an incredible stack of material today.
We're looking at a massive, meticulously detailed lore document that the community has titled The Fairy Garden Incident Full Saga.
Which is a brilliant title, by the way.
So good. And alongside that, we have furious, borderline obsessive investigative journalism from the Paldea News Network.
Right, providing a lot of the surrounding context.
And then, my personal favorite source for today, a seething, highly technical rant from a competitive VGC player.
Ah, yes. The Video Game Championships, the official competitive format.
Exactly. This player goes by the handle Violet Vanguard 10, and she is not happy.
It provides a truly unique cross-section of sources. You have the internal, almost mythical lore of the biological game world clashing directly with the cold, hard mathematics of competitive play.
Right, all wrapped up in the social drama of the player community trying to understand this one rogue actor.
It's fascinating.
And the promise we are making to you today is that this isn't just a silly gaming story about a guy who likes collecting cute digital animals.
No, not at all.
This deep dive is going to explore the fascinating adaptive biological lore of the evolution Pokemon, the baseline normal hedgehog and its 8 distinct evolutions.
We are also going to dig into the meta-history of scrapped corporate game designs and legal gridlocks.
Yes, and ultimately, we are going to take a chilling look at what happens when a player stops looking at a vibrant, living digital ecosystem as a world to inhabit.
And starts treating it like a broken mathematical equation that only they have the divine right to fix.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the bizarre biological history we are about to explore, we first have to understand the mind of the trainer.
Right. The trainer who became violently obsessed with it. We have to look at the ideology that drove him.
Because it dictates every single mechanical action he took in the game. And ideology is genuinely the right word here.
The Paldea News Network actually describes his mindset as cosmic paranoia.
Cosmic paranoia. I love that phrase.
This is very accurate. This isn't just a guy doing a themed Eevee-Only run for a quick YouTube video.
No, he legitimately operated under this documented cosmic certainty that if he didn't collect his specific team of hedgehogs under the strictest conditions imaginable,
the universe itself would suffer a catastrophic collapse.
Which is just, wow.
Yes, his journals are quite revealing on this front. He genuinely believed that without his precise mathematical intervention, the Paldea region would be conquered.
Conquered by what he termed inferior, non-Eevee Pokemon.
Right. In his mind, this would pave the way for ultimate villain exploitation, plunging the game's reality into an era of dark, inescapable ruin.
He actually compared his entire Pokemon Scarlet playthrough to a completely different franchise. And not even a successful one.
The Sonic comparison.
Yes, he compared his mission to Sonic the Hedgehog Project 06.
Which is such a specific and bizarre pull.
For those who aren't familiar with that, Project 06 is a fan-made remake designed specifically to fix the notoriously buggy, glitch-filled, unfinished 2006 retail disaster of a Sonic game.
It's a highly revealing metaphor for his psychological state, though. He views the entire Paldea region not as a functioning, breathing world, but as a glitchy ecosystem.
A glitchy ecosystem. Like every single Pokemon that isn't his specific chosen species is essentially a programming error.
Exactly. A biological bug that needs to be bypassed, subjugated, or eradicated.
He literally treats catching his team like hoarding the 7 Chaos Emeralds from the Sonic universe just to defeat the ultimate apocalyptic villain, Solaris.
It's wild. He sees himself as the lone programmer fixing a broken reality.
And to do that, he established what he calls his royal court.
And the rules for this court are uncompromising.
So strict. First off, every single hedgehog must be strictly male. He actively segregated and discarded any female that hatched.
But here is the kicker, and this is what drove the community absolutely insane. Absolutely none of his team can be shiny.
None of them. Which runs completely counter to typical endgame player behavior.
In these games, shiny Pokemon are the ultimate status symbol.
Right. Because if you've ever spent time shiny hunting, you know the math is brutal.
It really is.
The standard normal hedgehog has this pristine light brown and cream color palette, but the shiny variant has pale gray fur.
And the base mathematical probability of encountering one of these in the wild is 1 in 4,096.
That's a 0.024% spawn rate.
Yeah.
People spend weeks, sometimes months, optimizing sandwich recipes and chaining encounters just to find one gray hedgehog.
But this extremist, he rejects them entirely.
To him, the standard, non-shiny light brown palette represents pure genetic majesty.
He views a shiny light not as a rarity to be prized, but as a corruption of the baseline genome.
It's a strict enforcement of conformity. He doesn't want random, mathematically rare mutations disrupting his vision.
He wants absolute standardized perfection according to his own rigid aesthetic criteria.
And this need for absolute suffocating control extends to how he actually caught these creatures. This is the part of the saga that completely broke my brain.
The master balls.
Yes, to build this royal court, he caught all 8 of his hedgehogs using only master balls.
Right.
Now, wait a minute. Let me push back on this, because if you know the mechanics of this game, you know you only get 1 master ball per save file.
It is the absolute rarest item in the game.
It is coded to catch any creature with a 100% success rate, bypassing all capture math. It's meant for a literal, godlike, box art legendary creature.
And you're telling me he used them on the most basic introductory creatures you can find on the first route of the game?
Yes, he did. And naturally, my reaction was the exact same as the broader community. The immediate assumption was that he cheated.
That he used cloning glitches or injected malicious code or hacked his save data to generate the items.
But he refutes all claims of cheating. And our source, Violet Vanguard 10, actually corroborates this in her rant.
She does, and her breakdown of his logistics is terrifying.
It really is. This extremist spent hundreds of hours before he even really progressed the game's main story building, a highly sophisticated international, perfectly legal online trade network.
He systematically used the global trade station and linked trades with trainers across the globe.
Trading high-value competitive assets just to stockpile exactly 999 Master Balls.
And Violet Vanguard 10 angrily confirms that her own ex-crush, a guy named Bert, was one of the people acting as a logistics coordinator and master ball smuggler for him.
Bert. I mean, the dedication is staggering, even if the application is deeply concerning.
Think about the sheer time investment of initiating a trade animation 999 separate times just to move the items onto his save file.
It's way beyond dedication. I'm struggling to even process the logic.
It defies normal gameplay logic.
Setting up an international trade syndicate to acquire 999 Master Balls just to catch the most basic creature in the game, it's like building a multi-billion-dollar global supply chain.
Complete with cargo ships and international treaties.
Yes. And customs agents, just to legally acquire 8 very specific, perfectly standard-issue pebbles from a suburban driveway. Is this dedication to a bit, or is this a terrifying god complex?
I would argue it's entirely the latter, rooted in a psychological need for what we might call enforced luxury.
Enforced luxury.
Yes. In gaming, players often exert control over their digital environments to create order out of perceived chaos. But here, the luxury isn't just about possessing the best items.
It's about the deliberate, almost wasteful misapplication of those items.
Exactly. To prove a philosophical point, by using the ultimate fail-proof capturing device on a common creature, he is loudly declaring that his specific vision of the world supersedes the game's intended mechanics.
He is elevating the mundane to the divine through sheer, stubborn willpower and economic dominance of the game's trading economy.
He is forcing the digital world to acknowledge his supremacy.
Okay, but you don't build a 999 Master Ball empire for just any mundane creature, right? He could have done this with a digital pigeon or a digital rat on Route 1.
He could have, but he didn't.
Right. But he chose the normal hedgehog. Why this specific species? What makes it worthy of this apocalyptic, mathematically perfect obsession?
That requires us to dive deep into the biological marvel of this specific creature. Within the lore of the universe, this species is legendary precisely because of its unstable DNA.
It is essentially a blank slate of infinite adaptive potential.
Yes, and the way this potential resets from generation to generation is fascinating.
According to the Fairy Garden Incident document, the breeding cycle of this species is an absolute genetic hard reset.
Correct. No matter what highly evolved, specialized forms the parents have taken.
Whether they are creatures composed entirely of fire, water, or ice.
The offspring they produce resets entirely to a blank slate normal hedgehog in the embryo.
The specialized traits are never inherited.
Never. And finding 2 of these base hedgehogs in the wild to breed is famously difficult.
So, the lore document outlines how they usually reproduce, and it is equal parts highly efficient and deeply unsettling.
Ah, yes. The lavender slime.
Yes, if they can't find a mate of their own species, they breed with what the researchers call the lavender slime.
Ditto. The lavender slime is a creature notorious for its ability to flawlessly imitate the cellular structure of any living thing it encounters.
It fundamentally rearranges its own RNA and DNA to match the hedgehog perfectly.
Serving as a biological surrogate to produce a viable egg, it's a biological failsafe that ensures the continuation of the unstable baseline genome, even when the population is critically low.
So you have this blank slate creature born from a perfect cellular mimic. Let's talk about that baseline form before it mutates.
Well, you mentioned earlier that the Extremist rigorously enforced a male-only rule.
Right. And for a creature this small and fluffy, how can you even tell? I mean, visually, it's tough.
There is a very specific, subtle sexual dimorphism in the species. You have to look closely at the tail.
The tail.
Yes. Males typically have a straight-edged tail tip, which looks a bit like a jagged paintbrush. Females have a slightly curved or heart-shaped pattern at the end of their fur.
Okay, so you have this jagged-tailed blank slate male. And if it just stays in this unevolved state, avoiding any elemental triggers, it lives a pretty standard mammalian lifespan, right?
About 15 to 20 years.
Exactly. If it never encounters a catalyst, like a concentrated elemental stone or a specific harsh environment or a deep emotional bond with a trainer, it just lives a normal, quiet life.
But once it evolves, the unstable DNA locks into a new, permanent form, and its physiology stabilizes.
And this is where the biological divergence becomes truly incredible because its new lifespan, cellular makeup, and biological function wildly vary depending on the specific evolutionary trigger.
The environment entirely dictates the organism's physical future.
I want to write down those 8 paths, but I don't just want to list them off because the biology here tells a story about adaptation and the physical toll of power.
Absolutely. Let's start with the environmental adapters, the ones that find a way to merge peacefully with their surroundings.
Yes, the aquatic, grassy, and icy forms.
These are triggered by exposure to concentrated elemental radiation, like a water stone or specific geographic anomalies.
Like a moss rock deep in a pristine forest or an ice rock on a permafrost glacier.
Their cellular structures radically alter to match the environment.
And the how of that alteration is insane. The source documents explain that the aquatic form cells adapt so perfectly that they actually become molecularly similar to water.
Allowing it to literally melt into a stream completely unseen.
And the grassy form's biology shifts so drastically it performs actual photosynthesis.
Making it closer to a mobile plant than a mammal?
But the icy form is the wildest to me. It drops its body temperature to negative 75 degrees Fahrenheit to freeze the surrounding moisture in the air.
Negative 75.
How does a mammalian cardiovascular system survive that?
It requires the spontaneous generation of potent cryoprotectants, essentially biological antifreeze in its bloodstream.
Right, preventing ice crystals from rupturing its cell walls.
And because these 3 forms enter this deep, almost meditative, low-impact synergy with their habitats, their metabolisms slow way down.
They suffer very little cellular degradation over time.
If they stay in their ideal environments, they are the most robust of the evolutions, living anywhere from 28 to 32 years.
But then you look at the elemental extremes. If you expose the baseline hedgehog to a thunderstone or a firestone, you get the electric and fiery hedgehogs.
And these things are paying a massive biological tax for their power.
They're basically biological engines running constantly in the red.
Their metabolisms are incredibly high energy, almost self-destructive,
The electric form is constantly discharging and storing raw voltage from the atmosphere.
requiring a nervous system that can handle constant, massive electrical surges.
And the fiery one. It literally houses a 1600-degree furnace within its chest cavity, storing fire in an internal flame sac.
A 1600-degree furnace in a creature the size of a medium dog.
That kind of internal thermal stress takes a massive toll on the surrounding organs. They burn bright, but they burn incredibly fast.
Because of this high energy output, their lifespans are drastically cut short compared to the environmental adapters.
They only live about 18 to 22 years.
Then we have the cosmic evolutions, which move away from direct physical elemental radiation and rely heavily on cosmic cycles and deeply ingrained emotional states.
The diurnal, or psychic type, and the nocturnal, or ghostly and dark type.
These are triggered by the trainer leveling them up with high friendship during the specific hours of day or night, or using sun and moon shards.
The psychic one unlocks its cerebral power via direct sunlight. reading air currents to predict the future.
While the nocturnal one absorbs lunar energy into its rings, glowing in the dark and emitting auras that induce terror.
And while they aren't under the physical duress of housing a literal furnace, maintaining those deep psychic links takes a toll, right?
Yes, constantly processing future variables or manipulating shadowy lunar auras takes a significant neurological toll on the creature's brain synapses.
So they sit right in the middle of the spectrum, averaging a lifespan of around 25 years. Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh.
When you look at those differing lifespans we just talked about, it's so easy to compare them to human lifestyles.
That's a good point.
The fiery and electric types are the rock stars, right? They live extreme, high-stress, fast-paced lives, partying hard, exerting massive energy, and burning out young.
While the aquatic and grassy types are like Zen monks.
Exactly. Perfectly at peace, meditating in a forest or floating in a stream, preserving their energy to live long, tranquil lives.
That is a very apt analogy. The normal hedgehog is the ultimate biological microcosm of the nature versus nurture debate.
It is born as pure, blank potential.
Its entire biological destiny, what element it commands, its physiological makeup, and precisely how many years it will survive is dictated entirely by what it touches.
When it sleeps, and the ambient radiation of the environment its trainer places it in.
The trainer plays the role of a god, deciding the biological fate and lifespan of the creature simply by handing it a stone or walking it into a snowy field.
Which brings up the weirdest, most jarring part of this whole royal court setup.
The names.
Yes. This extremist who claims to respect the pure genetic majesty of these creatures, who caught them in luxury master balls and views them as the pinnacle of evolution,
Gave them the most infuriating lowbrow pop culture names imaginable.
Violet Vanguard 10 is absolutely sick over this in her rant, and honestly, I agree with her.
Yes, the sacrilege of his naming convention is a major point of contention in the community.
He named the majestic aquatic one William, after William Afton from the Five Nights at Freddy's horror franchise.
It's a bizarre choice.
The electric one is Waldo. The fiery one is Wallace, from Wallace and Gromit.
Wallace and Gromit, really?
The psychic one is Walter, as in Walter White from Breaking Bad.
Unbelievable.
The nocturnal one is Willie, for Steamboat Willie. The icy one is Washington, for George Washington.
So random.
The grassy one is Wily, after Dr. Wily from Mega Man. And the fairy one is Wally.
Violet Vanguard makes such a good point with this. You take this biological marvel, this blank canvas of genetic wonder,
and you slap it with edgelord, inappropriate pop culture references.
it completely ruins the imposing apocalyptic warlord aesthetic he's going for.
Completely.
What's fascinating here is that it actually highlights the inherent contradiction in his ideology.
How so?
He demands absolute genetic purity and economic luxury, yet he treats their individual identities as punchlines.
I see.
It reinforces the idea that he views them not as living, breathing biological marvels deserving of respect, but as custom-tailored, meticulously engineered accessories for his own ego.
But wait, I'm getting lost in the math here. With a creature defined by infinite, unstable, genetic potential, a creature that can literally adapt to any environment.
Why are there only 8 evolutions?
Right. We have 18 total elemental types in the game's universe. Bug, poison, steel, flying, ground. If their DNA is completely unstable, why did the genetic branching just abruptly stop?
This raises an important question, and the answer isn't biological at all.
Really?
No. It's deeply metatextual, rooted in game development history, mechanical finality, and a bizarre cultural gridlock that most players are completely unaware of.
Let's break down the mechanical history first, because this blew my mind when I read the source notes.
Originally, the developers followed a very strict mathematical pattern for this creature's design. In the early generations of the games, before a major mechanical update known as the physical special split occurred in Generation 4.
Right, where they changed how damage is calculated.
Exactly. Before that, all elemental attacks were universally categorized as either physical, meaning making physical contact, or special, meaning projectiles, or energy.
Got it.
The developers exclusively chose elements for the hedgehog's evolutions that fell under that old special classification.
Fire, water, electric, psychic, dark, grass, ice.
Yes, it was a deliberate design limitation.
And then years later in Generation 6, they introduced the fairy type to the game to balance out dragons.
And fairy, conceptually and mechanically aligned perfectly with the old special category.
So they gave the hedgehog a fairy evolution.
Exactly. And once they did that, the only special type left from the original 1996 scheme was dragon.
So Mathematically, creatively, the original design philosophy for the creature was essentially complete.
But the desire for more evolutions from the global community was insatiable.
Obviously, people love this thing.
And this is where the meta-irony of fan culture comes into play. According to leaked corporate design documents referenced in the Paldea News Network sources, the developers actively planned to break their old rule and continue the line.
Wait, really? They were going to make more?
Yes, they were deep in development on a flying-type evolution for Generation 7.
But they canceled it. They completely scrapped months of corporate development work.
And the reason why is fascinating.
Because the global online community loved this creature so passionately, they had designed thousands upon thousands of pieces of foreign art and speculative Fakemon evolutions over the years.
The proposed official flying-type design that the studio came up with looked far too much like the fan art that was already circulating widely on the internet.
It created an absolute legal and creative minefield.
The developers realized that any new official design they could possibly conceive for a flying type, or a ground type, or a bug type
Would inevitably resemble a fan's existing time-stamped concept art.
This risked severe accusations of stolen intellectual property or unoriginal ideas.
The community's sheer, overwhelming creative output literally created a gridlock that forced the developers to stop evolving the Pokemon.
The fans loved it so much they inadvertently killed its future biological potential.
If you are listening to this, I want you to imagine being that developer.
It would be heartbreaking.
Put yourself in that boardroom. You spend weeks, maybe months, concepting this beautiful, aerodynamic, flying-type hedgehog.
You balance its competitive stats.
You design its complex 3D animations, you rig the skeleton, you pitch it to the board of directors.
And then some producer walks in with a printout from an obscure internet forum.
Of a drawing a teenager made in math class 3 years ago, and it looks exactly the same.
And you just have to hit delete on all that work.
Yeah.
That is absolutely brutal.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword of a passionate fandom.
And it led directly to a major corporate marketing shift.
Right. The Pokemon Company realized they couldn't keep expanding the evolutionary branches without stepping on legal landmines, so they pivoted their entire strategy.
They transitioned the base normal hedgehog into a standalone, highly marketable global mascot.
Placing it on the exact same pedestal as their famous electric rat.
Exactly. They gave it exclusive superstar treatment.
It got a towering skyscraper-sized Gigantamax form in Generation 8. It got its own dedicated Let's Go game where it was the unevolvable star on the box cover.
They made the calculated corporate decision to make the base genetically unstable form the icon, rather than diluting the brand by adding more permanent evolutions.
So the evolutionary tree was permanently capped at 8, and it stopped with the fairy type.
Which brings us finally to the terrifying crown jewel of our Eevee-Extremists royal court.
The mystical hedgehog. The Sylveon.
We established earlier that the extremists named him Wally.
Right. This is where the story shifts from cool biological trivia and corporate history into straight-up psychological horror.
Because mathematically, within the game's code, there are two distinct paths to achieving this fairy-type evolution.
The first is what researchers and casual players call the hero path.
This is the standard developer-intended way.
To get the mystical hedgehog normally, the base creature needs to learn a fairy-type move. And crucially, it needs high friendship and love from its trainer.
You have to play with it, bathe it, feed it sandwiches.
The source text calls the result the bluey fairy aesthetic. It transforms into a peaceful, glittering creature of light that uses its soft, ribbon-like feelers to emit auras that soothe hostility and stop fights.
Because it is sustained by strong, positive emotional bonds, it lives a long time, up to 30 years.
And tragically, lore states it often passes away peacefully when its trainer dies or their connection wanes.
It is a biological evolution triggered entirely by positive emotional energy.
But our extremist, driven by his apocalyptic min-maxing philosophy, did not use the hero path.
No, he used what we can only call the dark path.
Maintained with complete, suffocating emotional isolation. 0 friendship points.
Active seething hostility between the creature and the trainer.
And instead of letting it naturally learn a fairy-type move, he forced the base hedgehog to learn a steel-type move before it evolved.
This is a profound, almost paradoxical contradiction in the game's elemental logic.
The fairy typing is inherently weak to steel. Steel crushes fairy.
By forcing the creature to master the very element that threatens its existence, while simultaneously denying it the emotional warmth it biologically craves to trigger its evolution.
The entire process mutates into something grotesque, and the physical result is horrifying.
The soft, ribbon-like sensory feelers didn't become aura soothers.
No, they mutated into lethal serrated metal edges. It became a hardened, battle-scarred dragon slayer, specifically designed to hunt apex predators.
The lore explicitly explains that this is why the tiny fairy type is mathematically super effective against massive dragon and fighting types in the game's damage calculations.
It possesses this sheer, unadulterated, borderline psychotic courage that allows a tiny fairy to outbrave giant, fire-breathing leviathans and seasoned martial artists.
It is a brilliant, albeit intensely dark, subversion of the game's mechanics.
How does an organism achieve a higher state of power when deprived of its natural catalyst? By weaponizing its own elemental weakness.
The Extremist's fairy absorbed the cold, hard, unyielding properties of steel into its fairy biology.
Forging immense strength, not in the warmth of nurturing love, but in the silent, unforgiving crucible of isolation, abuse, and defiance.
And this isn't just fluffy story lore, we really need to emphasize this.
If we look at Violet Vanguard 10's rant, she breaks down the math, confirming this is mechanically terrifying in the actual competitive VGC reality of the game.
She watches online matches. This fairy, Wally, is aggressively bred for physical defense and special attack.
She breaks down the exact EV spread effort values which dictate a creature's hidden stats, and it is optimized for pure slaughter.
Yes, the mechanical synergy he achieved is staggering. He utilizes a specific hidden ability called Pixelate, combined with the sound-based move Hyper Voice.
Okay, explain the math to me on this, because VGC players treat this specific combination like a tactical nuke, and I want to understand exactly why it's so lethal.
Certainly. Hyper Voice is normally a normal-type move with a high base power of 90.
Okay.
It's a sound wave, meaning it bypasses defensive maneuvers like Substitute.
Right.
Now, the ability Pixelate does two things. First, it fundamentally alters the properties of any normal-type move, converting it into a fairy-type move.
Okay, so now it's fairy damage.
Second, it applies a raw damage multiplier. Historically a 30% boost, now a 20% boost.
So the 90 base power jumps up just from the ability.
Exactly. But it doesn't stop there, because the move is now a fairy-type attack, and Sylveon is a fairy-type Pokemon.
It triggers the stab mechanic, the same type attack bonus.
Precisely. This multiplies the damage by an additional 50%.
So mathematically, a standard 90 power sound wave is converted into a staggering, roughly 162 power spread damage fairy-type nuke.
That hits multiple opponents simultaneously and cannot be blocked by standard defensive barriers.
It's mathematically devastating. It just deletes dragons from the field.
And Violet Vanguard notes that the way this specific Sylveon moves in battle, the way its animations play out,
It looks like it actively hates its own trainer just as much as it hates the dragons. It's one-shotting.
the game's mechanics and the Extremist's lore are perfectly, horrifyingly aligned here.
The Extremist optimized the creature for pure violence.
It proves a poetic, if grim, duality within the game's universe. Immense strength can indeed be born from love, but it can equally be forged from pure, concentrated spite.
So we know the weapon, this spite-fueled, mathematically perfected, serrated dragon slayer. And we know the mindset, a cosmic paranoia backed by a global supply chain of 999 master balls.
Yes.
So what happens when this uncompromising extremist actually unleashes this royal court on the Paldea region? What does his playthrough actually look like?
Absolute systemic carnage across every corner of the map.
Carnage is putting it lightly. He engaged in a campaign of total regional conquest.
The royal court didn't just beat the main quest, they systematically dismantled the established order of the game world.
They crushed the Elite Four, the traditional governing body of trainers. They completely humiliated Champion Gita.
They wiped out every single Team Star boss.
And Team Star, for context, are the rebellious student factions who utilize massive, customized Starmobiles.
Essentially heavily armored, battle-ready vehicles powered by specific Pokemon engines.
Right, and he just ran them over with hedgehogs. He didn't stop there. He subjugated the Titan Pokemon.
These are massive, mutated apex predators that guard Herba Mystica.
Which are essentially biological super supplements hidden across the region. He harvested absolutely all of it.
He conquered Naranja Academy, acing every academic exam while physically dominating the student body.
And he didn't even stop at the borders of the base game. The DLC logs show he traveled to the land of Kitakami and subjugated their local deities, the Loyal Three.
And then traveled to the Blueberry Academy in the underwater terrarium and demolished their highly competitive Elite Four, too.
It was an uncompromising demonstration of optimized superiority.
He treated the entire vibrant region not as a place to explore, but as a checklist of obstacles to be mathematically solved and eradicated by his royal court.
When you have a god complex fueled by mathematically perfect dragon slayers, it's only a matter of time before you run into someone who is just playing the game for fun.
And for this extremist, that target was a character named Penny.
The Penny incident, yes. Penny is a major narrative character in the game, and she happens to be a fellow evolution enthusiast.
Her entire team is composed of the various hedgehog evolutions.
In a normal playthrough, you'd think they would be kindred spirits, or at least respectful rivals.
Quite the opposite. The extremist viewed Penny's standard, non-master ball-caught, affection-raised evolution team as vastly inferior.
He saw her very existence as a nuisance that insulted his divine mandate for genetic and item-based perfection.
In his journals, the ones where he compares his reality to Sonic 06, he actually compares Penny to Amy Rose from the Sonic franchise.
Amy Rose.
Yes, he characterizes her as obsessively and desperately stalking him, begging him for validation, and asking to join his team.
And every single time the game's narrative required them to battle, every time she challenged him to prove her worth, he ruthlessly, systematically crushed her team.
He didn't just win. He optimized his strategies specifically to humiliate her.
He did it to remind her of her place at the bottom of the food chain. He bullied a fellow trainer into submission just to protect his own massive ego and prove that his dark path was superior to her hero path.
Which is deeply disturbing on a psychological level, but perhaps the darkest consequence of his rule, the true philosophical horror of his playthrough, is what happened at the very beginning of his journey.
Before the conquest. Before the 999 Master Balls were even fully deployed.
The tragedy of Quaxley.
Oh man, this part of the source material genuinely upset me. If you've played any of these games, you know the sacred tradition.
Every player starts the game by choosing one of 3 starter Pokemon given to them by the regional professor.
It's your first partner. The extremist chose the water-type duck Quaxley. But because his rigid paranoid ideology demanded a purely Eevee-exclusive run, keeping Quaxley on his team, or even in his storage system, would have, in his words, rendered his progress entirely worthless.
But he couldn't just put her in a PC box like a normal player doing a themed run. He felt he had to permanently discard her.
He stated in his manifestos that she had to be executed by either guillotine or electric chair to make way for the true monarchs.
The reality of what he actually did mechanically in the game is almost worse than an execution.
The documents describe a scene set in the tag tree thicket, a dense, gloomy forest area. He stripped Quaxley of all her rights as a starter.
He used an in-game item to shackle a 20-pound iron ball, the macho brace or iron ball item, to her ankle, severely dropping her speed stat.
He then threw her into a green recycle bin in the middle of the forest and left her in the freezing Paldean rain.
She was permanently exiled, relentlessly bullied and tortured daily by the wild local Pokemon, the Squawkabilly and Quaxwell, who told her she was a disgrace for being replaced by a rat.
And then the saga details a final confrontation. Months later, the extremist and his Sylveon Wally, the serrated dragon slayer, happened to pass by that very recycle bin in the mud while traversing the region.
Quaxley is screaming at him from the bin, crying out about how he threw her away, how she was supposed to be his partner, and how she was shackled and tortured just so he could maintain his arbitrary rules.
And the trainer doesn't even dismount his legendary ride Pokemon. He just looks down at her with completely dead, calculated eyes.
And the Sylveon, using its psychic empathy in the most twisted way possible, telepathically tells Quaxley that her lack of elemental versatility was a bottleneck to their success.
And her removal was just a necessary strategic optimization.
The trainer follows up by telling her that her jealousy is merely a manifestation of her own weakness.
He calls her a liability and a footnote in his grand design, and tells her he hopes she stays in that bin until her very existence is erased by the wilderness.
And then they just turn around and walk away, leaving her to the rain.
So what does this all mean? How do we even process this level of calculated cruelty in a game fundamentally designed about friendship, exploration, and catching cute monsters?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire saga speaks to the immense psychological dangers of min-maxing, not just in video games, but as a philosophy.
Min-maxing is the practice of minimizing all perceived weaknesses and maximizing specific strengths to achieve a mathematically perfect outcome.
When players become entirely consumed by this, when they optimize the fun, the empathy, and the narrative right out of the game, they stop engaging with the fiction of the world.
They stop seeing the magic.
Precisely. They stop seeing characters like Quaxley or Penny as living entities with stories, struggles, and value.
They reduce them to mere data points on a spreadsheet, a liability to be deleted, an inefficiency to be exploited for stat gains.
It is the absolute death of imagination, replaced by cold, sociopathic calculation. The player becomes a machine interacting only with other machines.
It's chilling. He succeeded in his mission. He saved his universe from his imagined apocalypse, but in doing so, he turned the vibrant Paldea region into a sterile, brutal spreadsheet where only the mathematically strong are allowed to exist and everyone else is shackled to an iron ball in the rain.
It is a dark reflection on how we choose to engage with the spaces we inhabit.
Well, to wrap up this incredibly wild deep dive, we have journeyed far today.
We certainly have.
We started by exploring the beautiful, highly adaptive biology of the normal hedgehog, a creature whose very cells can flow like a river, perform photosynthesis, or burn like a 1600-degree furnace depending on its environment.
We looked at the meta-history of how a passionate fandom's sheer volume of fanart literally created a legal gridlock that stanked a genetic line from ever growing a pair of wings.
And we watched how an uncompromising player with a terrifying god complex, an apocalyptic ideology, and a global supply chain of 999 master balls weaponized that unstable biology to absolutely break a digital world.
It's been a journey.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as we close out. Earlier, we learned a very specific, deeply profound biological fact about the evolution Pokemon.
No matter what extreme form the parents take, no matter if they are creatures of fire or ice, the genetic reset in the offspring is absolute.
Every single egg born from that cellular mimicry is a pure, untainted blank slate of infinite potential.
If that creature is truly a blank slate, then it possesses no inherent malice.
It is nothing more than a mirror, perfectly reflecting the soul, the environment, and the intentions of the trainer who raises it.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
I want you to look at your own digital worlds. Look at your optimized spreadsheets at work, your daily routines, the strict unwritten rules you impose on yourself, and how you treat the people within those systems.
What kind of environment are you radiating to the people and projects around you?
When the blank slates in your life look back at you, are you cultivating a glittering fairy garden built on bonds, empathy, and connection? Or are you forging serrated metal ribbons out of isolation, demands for perfection and spite?
It's a question worth asking yourself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring the lore of the world you inhabit. Remember to check your math, and we'll see you next time.